All right, 6th and 7th graders, we are starting the first 2 weeks of your virtual online learning with some review. So the first things that you will see uploaded for this week, which is April 20th, are distributive property and combining like terms review. So remember, when we're combining like terms, we need to make sure that we have apples and apples, oranges and oranges, bananas and bananas. So like terms are like the video that I linked on here to YouTube where they're talking about being on the same team. So make sure you watch that video and you understand what they're talking about when they say be on the same team. X and X squared, they look like they're on the same team. It's almost like having a red apple and a green apple. So they're similar, but they're not exactly the same. We can only combine them if they're exactly the same. And then the distributive property is one of those properties that we learned in the beginning of the year, and it talks about distributing something inside parentheses and coming out with an equivalent product because we are multiplying. So we're going to go ahead and try some of those. All right, so we are going to start easy and get more challenging. So when we're distributing, we are taking the number that is right outside the parentheses and we are distributing it inside the parentheses with multiplication. So a lot of times you or your teacher will draw these arrows. And what that means is 2 is being multiplied to 4x and 2 is also being multiplied to positive 5. 2 times 4x would be 8x. And 2 times 5 would be a positive 10. Because this term has an x on it and this term doesn't, we're done. That is as simplified as we can get because they are unlike terms, so we cannot put them together. Now, as you'll notice, as the problems go down the board, they get a little bit more complicated. So number 2 is going to start the same, except I have a negative number being multiplied in, and I have a minus sign in between. Now, you can solve this one 2 ways. You can look at it as a negative times a negative, which we know would be a positive, or you can always go back to that knowledge from the beginning of the year, and anytime you see a minus inside the parentheses, you can always use LCO. Leave, change, opposite. And that might help you really see that that 4b is actually a negative instead of a positive. So let's go ahead and distribute in this negative 3. So a negative 3 times a positive 6 would be a negative 18. And a negative 3 times a negative 4b would be a positive 12b. And then I also have this plus 2x that I have to add to the end. Now, if I had terms that were on the same team and they were like terms, I could combine them at this point. But 18 doesn't have any variables, 12 has a b, and 2 has an x. So I'm done, even though this one is a 3-term answer versus a 2-term answer, I still cannot combine any more like terms. All right, let's take a look at number 3. I just have what looks like a minus sign on the outside. Don't let that fool you. Remember, when that minus sign is on the outside, we can read it 3 ways. We can read it as a subtraction sign, which would be a minus sign. We could read it as a negative sign, which would be a negative 1, or we can read it as opposite of. So this sign could be saying, I want the opposite of everything inside the parentheses. So whether you decide to distribute the negative 1 or just take the opposite of everything inside that set of parentheses, both strategies will work. Because negative 1 times 3x would be negative 3x, which is the opposite of 3x, and negative 1 times negative 5, and again, if we wanted to do that leave, change, opposite, we could. Negative 1 times negative 5 would be positive 5, which is the opposite of the negative 5 that we saw originally. So when I come over here to rewrite it, I'm going to say negative 3x and positive 5. Now, this one is even more challenging because it also has a second set of parentheses that needs the distributive property. So I'm going to take this 4 and I'm going to distribute it to the 2x and the negative 7. Again, if it makes you more comfortable, leave, change. Opposite is totally fine. 4 times 2x is a positive 8x, and 4 times negative 7 would be negative 28. You could have also written that as plus negative 28. Both are equivalent. Now, here I didn't have anything that I could combine when I was finished, but in example 3, I do. If I'm looking at this first term, I notice that that negative 3 also has an x. And if I look over here at the 8, it also has an x. So I can combine or add these like terms. So negative 3 plus 8. Different signs subtract, keep the larger value sign. So that's going to leave me with 5x. And then as I keep going, you guys know how happy I am that I get to go in my classroom and get my pretty expos. If I keep going, I've got a positive 5 and a negative 28. Even though they look like they might not be like terms because one of the integers is positive and one is negative, as long as they don't have any variables attached to them, they are like terms. So don't let that trick you. And 5 minus 28, or 5 plus a negative 28, would be different signs subtract. And 28 minus 5 would be 23. Keep the larger value sign. I'll write it in pink, which would be negative 23. For my final answer being 5x minus 23. Hopefully you're staying with me. All right, right now I'd like you to take a look at number 4, and I want you to think about where the challenges are. The first challenge is going to be that there are 2 sets of parentheses. The second challenge is going to be that you have this scary negative, opposite of, or minus sign in between. It's really not that scary. Just like we did in the first one where we distributed in or say opposite of, we do that to the second one. So I'm going to draw in the distributive property lines, and then I want you to actually pause the video and try this one on your own. Unpause it once you get an answer, and then see what I get. So there's your hint. Go ahead and pause, solve, and check back with me when you're done.